Hi there. In this video, I'm going to talk through compound interest. Compound interest and compounding is a topic that most people have probably heard about, but most people don't actually think about its real world implications and what it actually means, how it can impact your life. Albert Einstein described it as the eighth wonder of the world, but why did he do that? So to really understand compounding in a useful sense, I remember hearing this story that if your parents had a kid and they put $100 a month into this kid's bank account every month up until he was 18 years old, and then just didn't put anything in ever again, assuming the account returns just the market returns, which historically over the last 100 years have been around 10%, then at the end of the 18 years, they would have $60,556.79 in the bank account. The breakdown of this would be that they would have deposited $21,600, and in that 18-year period, they would have earned $38,956. Now, where it starts to get more interesting is if they were to never deposit again and just leave the $60,556 that they've got to this point in the bank account and waited till the kid was 65 years old, then they would have about $7.5 million at the end of the 65 years. So the kid would be a multi-millionaire. Now, ironically, that's just 18 years of paying $100 a month, which is, like I said, 21,600. If you were to start at 18 and pay $100 a month every month from the age of 18 until you were 65 years old, assuming the same market returns, so in this case you're paying it for 48 years rather than 18, you would only have 2.1 million. And this is because of compounding returns. Now, I am in that same group as probably most people. My mum and dad didn't know about this, and so I do not have a massive amount of money sitting waiting on me compounding there to make me 7.5 million. But what I found was this clip here of Tony Robbins talking about compounding, and in my head I thought, okay, I've missed the initial amount. I don't have $60,556 by the age of 18. Don't have it now by nearly 30. But how much money do I actually need to put in to get to similar returns? And so obviously the more money you have at the start, the better the chance you have of doing that. But how much do you actually need to compound to make yourself a millionaire based on your age?
You're not going to earn your way to a fortune. Even people that do that don't usually keep it. You got to make money while you sleep. And the only way to do that is understand compounding. So if a child is a young person, 19, 20 years old, puts aside $50 a week, they put it in the market over historical returns, it's 2.2 million. But you might say, I'm not 19. So we created a chart here for you, if you want to throw it up, that you should know what your number is. If you're 20, you need $3,000 a year. If you're 40, you're going to need $15,000 a year. If you're 50, you got to put away $37,000 a year to have $1 million at a 7% return.
So to try and break this down for myself, I looked at the S&P 500, and that's typically what people say when they're saying the market is usually the S&P 500's returns. So assuming we use the S&P 500, historically over the last 100 years, it has averaged 10% per average. But going through COVID and a few other financial crashes even since I've been born, it's not safe to assume that it'll be 10% every year. Over time, it should average out. But for the sake of this, I wanted to do two things. So assume a lower amount of returns. Now, I'm going to go with 8% on that. I think that is very reasonable. And an alternative is to show 10%. So what we're going to do is try to work out at each age, what would your monthly contribution be to try and have $1 million at age 65, assuming 8% returns. And then alternatively, just because I've worked it out, I'll also show you what that would be like with 10% returns. So, starting at age 20, how much do you need to put away monthly to be a millionaire by 65? And so the interesting thing on this one is at 8% returns, the monthly contribution is $200 a month. So if you put in $200 a month and the market returns 8% a year, compounding over time, you don't touch your investment, you don't take anything out, then you'll have 1,061,000 at age 65. If the market was to return 10%, you'd be looking at $2.1 million. Now, the interesting thing is about $200. So, from my own portfolio that I've managed to accumulate, I have about $18,000 in it. And I've looked at some dividend stocks, but the thing is, you get paid about $100 a month dividends depending on what you do with your selection of stocks in around that mark. You can look at other people who have dividend portfolios online, and that really is very achievable in that amount. So if you assume that $200 monthly is what you need to put in, and at a certain point you're going to be getting paid more than $200 monthly from dividends alone, then this becomes really easy. So this does really back up the point. The earlier you start, the easier it is. But at $200 a month, if you have that when you're 20 and you can start putting that aside, you'll probably surpass the figure of 2.1 million because of the amount you'll be able to reinvest from your own portfolio. And why wouldn't you? Time's on your side. So obviously, one of the biggest problems with investing $200 a month when you're 20 years old is when you're 20 years old, you can probably find better stuff to do with $200 a month. It's quite a lot of money in most cases, unless you got trust funds or you were far richer than I was at that age. So, assuming you missed that boat, I'd say most people would. At 25, if you were to get tuned in a little bit quicker, you would need to contribute $285 a month. And at 8%, this would result at 1,500,000 by age 65. If it was 10% returns annually, it would be 1.8 million. So you can see there's quite a substantial difference in just the amount of percentage returns. But remember, the key thing here is you can't control that. It's outside of your hand. All you can do is keep making the deposits. Again, once you have a portfolio that's getting up to that size, the amount that we're depositing here, 285 a month, probably means you're not even putting any of your own money in. You're just reinvesting what you already have at that stage. So it's just getting the portfolio off the ground. At 30 years old, if you leave it a few years later, then you would have to contribute $450 a month. And so at 8% interest, this would result in 1,030,000. And 10% interest, this would be 1.7 million. Again, if you missed that boat, and loads of people do, but it's still not too late, at 35, assuming hopefully at this stage you have more money or more income along, you would be looking at a monthly contribution at $670 a month. And at 8%, that will result in 1,500,000, and at 10%, that would be 1.5 million. Again, if you missed that boat and it goes to 40, we're really starting to see the monthly contributions rank up. So this would require $1,100 a month, and at 8%, you would have 1,050,000, and at 10%, you would have 1.4 million. The key thing to start understanding on this, and this is really difficult and took me a while to work out, is the salary that you have won't make you ridiculously wealthy unless it's already a really good salary. And to hammer this home, if we take a first example there of the 20-year-old who invested for 45 years and they got the 10% interest, so they were looking at 2.1 million at age 65. At age 66, if they just leave it untouched, they would be looking at 2.35 million. So they're getting $235,000 in that 1 year. And for every year it continues, that number gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you think of how many jobs are capable of paying you $235,000 a year, there's not many. But if you think that time is more valuable than money in this equation, and actually just getting money into the equation as early as you can and continuing to invest over time, you will start to see returns that are far greater than your salary could ever be. And so this is the secret here is get money into an investment account, pick assets that are safe and compound over time, and sit back and watch money start rolling into your account, because your money can make more money than you can by utilizing time, and compounding returns, where they don't look that impressive at the start, really start to ramp up. So if you're in most jobs that don't pay you $1 million and you think, how am I going to get to $1 million? Start investing, keep investing, and let compounding returns do the rest, and the numbers will go far beyond what you ever thought was possible. And to highlight that, here's just one more clip showing just how feasible this is for anyone, regardless of their salary currently.
So the first step is not to wait till you have a huge sum of money, because the illusion is, when I have more money, then I'll invest, then it'll be worthwhile. The most important thing is get started with whatever you have, because if you do that, you get to tap into the power of compounding we all know about, but very few people use. I'll give you an example, a guy named Theodore Johnson. You probably never heard of him. Worked for UPS, never made more than $14,000 in an entire year of his life, and yet when he retired, he had $70 million and he didn't inherit a dime. So how do you do that? A friend of his said, you've got to stop being a consumer and you've got to become an owner. You got to become an investor. And he said, I have no money to invest. I make $14,000 a year. And his friend said, no one has the money to invest. But if the government came by and put a 20% tax above what you're paying now, you'd scream, you'd yell, and you'd ban it. You'd adjust. I'm going to make you a wealthy man. He took the 20% off the top, never let him see it, put it straight in the investment account. It was worth $70 million, compounding by the time he was in retirement.